OK, let's get started. I have an experience report the way that Gene actually puts it every time. So I have a classical experience report I want to actually talk about. Did any of you attend Jian's presentation yesterday on site reliability engineering? OK, you got a couple of people there. That's good. So if you did that, I'm sure you're going to appreciate this a little bit more. How about the presentation from the Rundeck, Douglas in Rundeck this morning, the plenary session? So I think that was also very relevant to what I'm going to talk about today. So let's jump right in. So you see the name here as Primal. One of the reasons for that, I do see some Oracle folks there. Are there any other Oracle folks in this audience? I see a few. So I don't represent all of Oracle. I'm sure all of you know a lot of people at Oracle who have maybe you have worked at Oracle in the past. I don't represent all of Oracle. I represent a specific line of business at Oracle, and that's called Oracle Marketing Cloud. So basically, the reason why I'm actually talking about oRE, even before I start oRE, I want to sort of tell you what oRE is. That stands for Oracle Reliability Engineering. So it's not a classical site reliability engineering model. We are talking about an Oracle Reliability Engineering model. And even in that, I want to talk about our specific implementation of that. That's why I'm calling it Primal. So I don't represent all of Oracle. It's about how Oracle Marketing Cloud has gone through the transformation of using the reliability engineering principles. So just so that you understand a little bit more of the context of what we are talking about, the first thing to think about is like understand how this $40 billion company is sort of transitioning from where it was, this big database giant, into all this cloud-first policies and strategies that you keep hearing about. So to do that, what I'm trying to do here is to break down that $40 billion company into a $200 million company. So that's what we actually are in Oracle Marketing Cloud. So Marketing Cloud is a fairly easy concept to understand. So if you think about your companies or any of the similar companies trying to sell a product to somebody else or sell a service to somebody else, the first thing you really need to have is to have set up a marketing campaign and being able to generate your sales leads out of that. So that's where marketing automation tools come in. So this marketing automation field has exploded over the past 10 years or so. There are so many different companies, so many different players there. We are obviously one of the market leaders. We as in Oracle are one of the market leaders. Adobe is a huge player there, and Salesforce is a huge player. There are a lot of different, very, very big companies playing in this market. So the part that is interesting here is the fact that, just go back there. So there are lots of different components of Oracle Marketing Cloud here. So there's B2B, obviously. Then there's B2C, how you actually reach out to your consumers. Then you have the social marketing, where you actually try and get your social media in, so the inputs from your social media into your marketing campaigns. And you also have your test analytics and a lot more analytics-driven marketing. So all these things are put together into what we call as this Oracle Marketing Cloud. And this marketing cloud is sort of works off of each other. So out of that, the biggest component is what I'm going to talk about, which is this B2B Marketing Cloud. So as I said, our business is about $200 million. We got about 2,000 customers. And obviously, the number of employees that we are talking about here are about 225 plus the sales folks. So think of this like a classical SMB kind of thing. So when you hear about Oracle, don't think of this large company. In the context of what we are talking about here, a very classical SMB here with fairly profitable margins. So what do I do there? So I do platform engineering. I know that a lot of you have actually exposed to platform engineering and probably been working in platform. So I do platform and release engineering for the Oracle Marketing Cloud. And our goals are fairly straightforward. So basically, the number one thing that we provide is provide platforms for developers and possibly SREs to build things off of our platforms. So basically, these are tools and systems that they could build off of the platforms. The second one is, of course, we are, just like all of you, we are also moving to the cloud. In our case, we are moving to Oracle Cloud. So how do you actually make that transition process a lot more seamless? So that is another one of our focus areas. And then the classical DevOps value stream. If you think about everything from the point of view, how do you actually have the tools for the CI, CD, monitoring, and basically the deployment process end to end from a life cycle point of view. We provide tools for all of that. So this is sort of like an eye chart, but I hope you can see this. I just want to throw that out there because this gives you a context of what we talk about as platform engineering. It might be different from what you have there. The reason for that is we look at the platform engineering team as sort of the glue between pretty much all the different services that this product is needed for this product to actually get deployed. So you can see that it sort of works with, on the bottom, you can see that it works with lots of product services who actually think of them like Scrum teams who would need the services. And on the other side, the left side, you can see the cloud services. So this is another set of teams, some of the organizations that actually uses some of the tools that we have and make sure that the whole thing sort of works as one process as opposed to multiple processes. So again, the question when I first talked about this at my company, the first question I got was like, why don't you use the classical SRE model, right? And that's, again, I don't know about all of you, but I've had some trouble getting the classical SRE model working because you talk about all the successes and you read about all the success at the FANGs and everywhere. I'm not really seeing that at my place. So obviously, there are some mismatches there. And how did that happen? A bunch of reasons. The number one reason, right? Oracle's growth over the past several years in the cloud space. So if you, I talked about $40 billion in a company. Out of that, 15% of the revenues come from cloud. So it's only 15%. The rest of it is still database and all our older products. But that 15% has been through a tremendous growth. I mean, so we have had 2x growth over the past couple of years. So what we're really talking about is when Oracle buys companies, we actually bring the whole stack in, and we don't make any attempts to actually change that over. So this was something that was surprising to me when I actually joined Oracle. So they believe that if a business is successful, try and keep that success intact instead of really having to disrupt that by trying to migrate them. So obviously, one of the reasons is that, yeah, you have multiple stacks with different technologies all playing together. Then that brings about challenges with skill sets. You're not going to have a lot of people with uniform skill sets who could possibly be turned into an SRE or who could join an SRE team. And because of the fact that we are actually in the process of migrating from a classical SaaS platform to more of a cloud platform in our OCI paradigm, we find that there is significant lack of interest for people to really understand what is happening today with the fear that, okay, when we move to OCI, things are going to be different. And if things are going to be different in OCI, I would rather focus on my product right now as opposed to trying to do an SRE kind of work. And the last one, again, I was at Nike's presentation yesterday, and I really like the concept of MVC. But this is something that has been hurting all of us, right? So when you talk about compliance, what is that minimum viable compliance? Yeah, that's great. Now let's actually try and reduce that compliance level to the lowest possible levels. But what if we have way too many compliance activities? That's actually going to bring it down. So that's always a challenge that we actually work through. So in that context, let's talk about why, right? Again, that may not have convinced you as to why you wanted a different process. Let's talk about very specific use cases here. The number one use case, I'm sure you have seen this. If not, if you haven't seen this, you are really lucky you're working in a place that has already gone through that transition. What you're really seeing here, or what I saw when I started doing this, was that there was this tacit expectation that whatever you do, the roles of every team is sort of very well defined, and there has to be some kind of a team or an activity that sort of glues everything together. I would call it like duct tape or Band-Aid, but essentially every step of the process, starting from the point of view of product definition to product development to deployment to monitoring to ensuring that your customer success is there, is sort of going through, as you can see, DevOps, right? So DevOps in that case is again, it's not about understanding what DevOps is. It's about using DevOps as that de facto player, de facto box in there to say that, okay, this is the team that sort of glues everything together. So this is great. I was feeling great. Yeah, I'm so important there. But having said that, the number one issue that you're going to have there is you're going to be spread too thin, and you're going to be the critical path of everything, and that really brings down your overall efficiency. So obvious reason, right? So why does it happen like that? Why do you need that glue between all these different steps in the process? And this sort of explains it. Organizationally, you can see that this sort of splits into multiple lines of businesses. So the fact that we are inherently into very different lines of businesses, the fact that my SVP don't even have like a regular conversation with the SVP of the operations team makes my job a lot more difficult because their priorities are so misaligned with what we have in our world. So this really brings about that, sort of highlights the challenge that if we are really trying to do something like this by putting a team in between, at least let's make sure that the lines of businesses can actually talk to each other. So this one is truly an eye chart, but I want to show you this because this is really telling. This was the number one reason why I thought we have to do something differently. To deploy one line of code to our customers on the cloud, it takes us 21 different handoffs and 6 different teams to work through it. So think about it, one line of code. So this is where you would have some kind of a release cadence available. You release the product, and the customers have come back with one issue that you might want to solve. It could be a configuration issue. It could be like a code issue. It could be anything that is so simple that it's just a line of code. So the inefficiencies of something like this is so telling that if we have to spend that much mental energy to do that, again, the handoffs in itself aren't really bad. If you're really talking about one team, you're trying to hand things off. You say, you write the code, you build it, and you hand it off to a tester to test it. That sort of makes sense. But that's not what we're talking about here, right? What we are really talking about is sort of transcending organizational boundaries when you do this. So it always has to go to some kind of an approval somewhere. And it's all built in using the Jira workflow. So what you would have is that after every step, somebody has to go in and ping somebody, hey, did you see my Jira request? Can you approve that? So once you approve that, OK, so it's approved. Now you go to the next person. So that inherently slows it down, and it becomes such a issue with the morale for the developers, right? Because your developers are heard about the problem, solve the problem. You want the customers to have it right now. You're going to wait for 1 week because it has to go through your approval board. So these were the context in which we wanted to do what we did. And what you see on the left side here is something that is totally familiar to all of you, right? Is there anybody who has not seen this? So if you have read Gene and John's DevOps handbook, I'm sure you have seen this. If you haven't read that, you should be reading that book. Right? So, and this is originally coming from Google. So Google came up with this several years back, and I think it was highly popularized by DevOps handbook illustration of this. What you're seeing there is a fairly simple SRE concept. This is the traditional SRE model. So in the traditional SRE model, as Gian was talking about yesterday, as well as most of you know about, it's a permanent role. It's a group that actually eventually takes over a product that is ready to be launched from the developers. So development actually gets the product to a state of being launched, and they go through a process of launch readiness and handoff readiness review. Once that is there, they actually take it over. Even in the presentation from Douglas this morning, one of the things that we are hearing is that not every feature is going to be SRE ready, or you're going to have an SRE for that. You're going to have to reach a level of maturity to do that. So we basically took that whole thing and flipped it around. What we did in Primal was that we basically created a rolling role within the development community, within the Scrum teams, to make sure that the role that is done by developers are done by Primal. So your developers, typical developers, do not have to get up to the skill of using the platform to build what they need to build. And once it has reached a level of maturity, we don't need to have a situation where we have to go look for an SRE, or we have to go look for, is there an SRE team? Because we don't have an SRE team. So what do? We go with the traditional model there. We don't really disrupt every part of that process. We actually keep as many steps and the silos in the process that needs to be there, but then use our existing leverage to make sure that this happens. So the primary difference, as you can see here, is initially you can see that developers are creating and self-running it for 6 months or some amount of time in the SRE model. In the Primal model, you basically see that Primal is actually doing that. And when it reaches the level of maturity it needs, and this is where the operations teams are very skilled at, right? They are extremely skilled at operating things, making sure that things are monitored, things are actually reported back if there are some issues. So by the time it reaches that level of maturity, operations teams have the right kinds of SOPs that they need to do to troubleshoot, to actually make sure that it sort of works well. So that is the fundamental difference between SRE and the Primal model that we created. So what does a Primal need typically, right? So obviously, they need a lot of things from the platform engineering team, which is my team. So these are all classical things that you can think of. Let's say if I want to if I want to create a node type, if I want to create something that actually, an environment in which I can actually run my builds, I need to make sure that I know what that build book is. I need to know how I'm going to build that node. So obviously, they need to be skilled at Chef. Obviously, from a build configuration point of view, you want to make sure that your local builds aren't going to cut it. You need to actually integrate it into the CI builds as soon as possible. So their ability to do things using TeamCity, trying to set up the configs and get it rolled into our CI build process is very critical. Same thing with, we have our platform team has created an ELK stack that is very generic that anybody can plug into by having their own workflows. So in the past, before Primal, what happens is in any team wanting to build any kind of telemetry, they would basically come back to us, platform team, and say, hey, can you do this for us? When the platform is already there, now the Primal can actually take that and basically design a workflow. They don't need to be an expert in anything other than the fact that, hey, they know how the product works. Similarly, we are moving really headfirst into the whole concept of containers and Kubernetes. So if you need to deliver a service, if you need to deploy a service, you basically need to know how do you need to run your kube control and how do you need to actually run your set up your Helm charts and run it. So that's where Primal can help too. I don't know if any of you stopped by at the Sensue booth there. So this is a fantastic product we've been using for quite some time. So one of the ways in which we use Sensue is not just to do infrastructure monitoring, but we do application monitoring too. So the way it works is that we provide, platform engineering provides the containers that developers can basically check out and add their application monitoring checks and then push it through the pipeline so that it actually gets, all the elements actually gets monitored in production. And that's another one we would expect the Primal to do. And obviously, if you're really talking about the real-time metrics, primarily time series data metrics and all that, we have a tick stack that we provide, and Primal can actually hook into that. So as you can see, the way we have defined Primal is to be more of a consumer of the platform services in a more efficient and somewhat of an elevated manner than a typical developer who's not initiated to some of these things would be using. The other critical aspect of it, a few things, right? Information is key for Primal or the developers to be succeeding. So what we have here is basically we have a really, really interesting dashboard that we have provided. This is a real-time dashboard that will tell the Primals and the developers at any given point of time what's the status of your build, on each of the branches and that they are working on. What's the status of each of the parts in which they are actually working on? They have deployed their code to. So that kind of information is very, very critical for them to actually make their decisions without really having to come back to us, the platform team, to say, OK, how do I do this? There are a few other things, right? As I mentioned earlier, we don't use AWS. We don't have elastic resources in-house. And we don't even have access to OCI to actually get elastic resources. So how do we do that? So we use really innovative technologies there. So this is something that was mentioned yesterday at one of the presentations. I believe it's the Verizon presentation they were talking about. So we basically take larger servers, containerize them, and run Kubernetes there to create elastic resources on that. So these are the solutions that's provided by the platform team, but that sort of enables the Primars to do what they need to do. Then there are some other aspects like there might be times in which you might want to access and run access databases and run queries on shared databases. So pretty much all these things are provided as sort of a service to the Primar so that they don't really have to go figure out how to do some of these things. And obvious things, everybody does this and everybody does CI. I hope everybody does pre-flights, but we obviously do significant amount of pre-flights. This sort of and this is all automated to the extent that the merges are typically auto-merged, basically meaning that if your pre-flights pass and if your tests pass, your commits are actually going to get merged in. So this sort of ensures that your trunk is never broken. The other aspect of it is this is Chef DK has been a huge godsend for us. And anybody here uses Chef DK? That's great. So yeah, I see a few of you here. So without Chef DK, I don't think we would ever be as successful as with Primar as we have been so far. The fundamental reason for that is, you think about it, right? We provide the cookbooks for various node types. Now the Primars would come in and say, okay, I need to actually make some changes, make some tweaks to your cookbook. I need to actually add some recipes so that my new service can actually work on these nodes. If they have to come back to us, to the platform team to do that, obviously it's going to be a lot more inefficient. So the ability for the Primars to actually download the Chef DK, set up their environment using Vagrant and VirtualBox, and really get whatever OS they want get installed there and get it tested, that is significantly useful for us. So I talked about some of the self-sufficiency aspects of it. So it's really, really important to empower your developers and Primars instead of having to have them come back and open tickets and things like that, right? So we have built a completely seamless reporting system, basically a self-sufficiency reporting system, primarily based on the fact that, yes, all these services here, so these are the kind of things that typically a Primar would need. I mean, you want to do your CI/CD, you want to do your Kubernetes deployments, you want to actually do, get your alerts and things like that. Pretty much all those things are integrated into a very simple in-house system, basically, which we have built based on Sinatra and MySQL. Now, these are all the things that we provide, platform teams provides, and great. Hopefully all these things work. But unfortunately, we still have a lot of problems. I mean, that's where I would absolutely love to have some feedback from any of you. So the number one issue that we have is the whole Primar lifecycle ownership, right? So if you remember, we sort of started from the point where you saw that DevOps boxes in between and the whole workflow. Now it looks like we have changed all of that to put PE everywhere, right? It's not as bad as I said that to be, but still, you can still see that there is that dependency somewhere. And eventually, our goal is to make sure that these are owned by Primars or a traditional SRE so that there is no transitions that are happening that are very, very heavy and costly for us. And that's where we're really going with it. So here, if you look at it, if you go through 3 different streams, your systems architecture or infrastructure architecture or your launch plans, PEs are involved along the way for every step of the way. How about if we can get the actual developers, the people who actually code, to be owning these things? That's our eventual goal. And so we're still working through some of this. So and again, it's a progression. It's an evolutionary path for us. The next step in the process here is to sort of start replacing PE here with a lot of Primars, and then see what's the extent to which we can do it. Is it possible to do it like 100%, or is that actually going to be somewhat less than that? So that's one of the challenges. And sort of to summarize this whole thing, right? We still have a lot of problems, as I said. As and when we are migrating to cloud, migrating to OCI, that is Oracle's cloud initiative, we are seeing a lot of things that are different. And as I mentioned earlier, that is one of the reasons why we are getting hesitance from people to really become an SRE kind of thing. So is it even possible to eliminate the whole operations team with services? That is something that we are considering. How practical that is, I don't know, but sometimes it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy that some of our operations teams, when they see these things, they are actually moving away from being able to support some of these services. So we have to think about a model in which maybe some of these operational activities has to be a lot more supported by a true SRE model, or it has to be through a bunch of automated activities. So training is obviously the other one. So you can see that a Primal is typically a developer who continues to be a developer. They're not changing groups. They're not doing anything. They're actually a developer. So if you look at their typical sprint responsibility, it's about 50% on the actual product features, the other 50% on Primal activities. So the question is like, is that really the right kind of mix? Is that something that we are able to sustain? So let's say if we have multiple Primars in a Scrum team, which is always possible because of the fact that there might be one developer who's a lot more well-versed in Chef, whereas another developer who's a lot more well-versed in Docker and Kubernetes. So depending on that, we would end up having multiple Primars. How sustainable is that model? I don't know. This is something that we are still figuring out. And going ahead, right? One of the things we want to do is, as I said, try and see if we can automate out of this whole mess, right? So one of the things that's been suggested that we are sort of exploring right now is this concept of super containers. It's pretty simple. So I talked about the aspects of monitoring and logging and telemetry and pretty much all the different services that platform engineering provides. How about we actually create containers that include all those things? Basically, all those things comes right off the bat. So it becomes a lot more easier for the developers to do that themselves instead of having to have a Primal or a separate set of people who are responsible for doing that. So those are some of the thoughts I have. I know that we got another 2+ minutes. So any questions, any thoughts you want to share? Maybe I should ask this. So are there people who are actually using SRE today in your organizations? Any of you? Considering using SRE? Great. What do you think is the biggest challenge that you're seeing right now? If you're trying to use an SRE model?
We're not really a service organization. We're a bank. Well, we're an internal part of the bank. So we don't offer a retail service of providing a service. We're just maintaining a system. So I think SRE is geared towards that type of, Google invented it. It's for their type of operation. I think your way of modifying it to oRE is probably the kind of concept we would have to look at.
Yeah, I think that's something at least I found the hard way. So we tried to do SRE in the traditional way. It wasn't working. And I keep reading everywhere that it works great. Sure, it works great for places where you have the right kind of infrastructure to support that. How do we actually get there? So I hope this has given you some insight into some of the thought process that goes into really trying to get to that point where we want to get to. Right? Thank you. Anybody else want to share? If you're considering SRE, go ahead.
So for us, the main challenge is how to have developers who are interested in ops, acquiring ops. The other way, so we are trying the other, where we have people who have ops skills, and we are trying to develop them with them.
Yeah, so I've seen that. That's always a lot easier, right? So people who are on the ops side of things say, I want to learn some of these things. And a lot of the ops people these days are fairly savvy with a lot of the tools that's out there, right? I think it's a good point. So again, as you can see, the way we have tried to address that is basically providing developers the right kind of tools so that they don't really have to go beyond a certain extent, which is always their concern. Am I actually doing more core versus context kind of thing? So basically, let's say you focus on your core, but at the same time, you understand that here's what you really need to do to make sure that your core reaches your customers as fast as possible. I think that's the mindset flip that we have been able to at least start right now. Again, so you can see there's a lot more to be done to get to where we want to, but I think that transition has started happening, and we want to really continue pursuing that. All right, thanks everyone, appreciate it.